For over 20 years, I carried a box of my journals with me everywhere I moved. And I always told myself the same thing. I was preserving memories. But about 6 months ago, I finally sat down and started reading them again. And I absolutely hated it. Because instead of feeling nostalgic, I mostly just felt emotionally exhausted. My body couldn't tell the difference between remembering something and experiencing it all over again. I felt like I was dragging myself back into emotional states I had already survived once before, and at some point I realized something. Perhaps I was not preserving memories as I originally thought. Perhaps I was preserving emotional weight instead. So, I shredded almost all of them. All 20 years of them. I started journaling when I was probably around 14 years old. At the time, keeping a diary was just kind of something people did. But looking back, personally, I mostly wrote when I was overwhelmed, or sad, or angry, or confused. Usually when I felt something strongly and didn't really know where to put it. A lot of these entries were things I didn't feel comfortable telling anyone else, or maybe things I felt like I couldn't tell anyone else. And over the years, I'd stop journaling for a while, then randomly start again, then stop again. But when I started going through these journals recently, I noticed something. Most of them weren't really documenting my life. They were documenting the emotional survival of the moment. There were happy memories in there. Trips, crushes, funny moments, goals, tiny snapshots of my life. But most of the time, I only really felt compelled to journal when something wasn't going the way I hoped it would. And I think that's probably true for a lot of people. You don't usually rush to your journal because everything feels calm and perfect. You write because something is sitting heavily on your chest and you need somewhere for it to go to. And for me, that became the journals. It was a place where disappointment, fear, frustration, and loneliness lived. And at the time, it genuinely helped. Writing things down felt like releasing pressure from my brain. But over time, without really meaning to, I think I accidentally created an archive that was mostly too painful to revisit. I attached a lot of meaning to keeping these journals. I told myself that one day I'd sit down and read through all of them and appreciate the memories. But the truth is, I almost never opened them, until recently. And when I finally did, I noticed something almost immediately. My body was reacting to what I was reading, and not just emotionally, physically as well. Some entries made me anxious, some made me embarrassed, some made me angry, and yes, some made me feel nostalgic. And even though I was technically just sitting there reading old words on paper, my nervous system did not care. Apparently, the brain doesn't fully distinguish between something vividly remembered and something actively happening in the present. So reading these journals didn't feel like revisiting memories. It felt like re-entering the emotional states. And because so much of my journaling happened during emotionally intense moments, by the end of reading even one journal, I felt completely emotionally drained. My nervous system felt like it had gone on an emotional roller coaster, and I did not want to be on it. And that's when I started realizing something. Maybe what I was carrying around all these years wasn't actually memories. Maybe it was the emotional weight. Literal emotional weight that followed me from apartment to apartment, house to house, room to room, for over 20 years. And that realization made me ask myself something. If I keep carrying this emotional weight both physically and metaphorically, when am I planning to let it go? I knew I didn't want to get rid of these journals to pretend like those experiences never happened. I wasn't trying to erase my past or my experiences. Those experiences absolutely shaped me into the person I am today. But at the same time, I also didn't want to keep reliving them over and over every time curiosity or nostalgia made me open a journal. So after thinking about it for a long time, I realized something that honestly changed the way I looked at all of this. These entries had already served their purpose. When I wrote them, they helped me process the emotions I didn't know what to do with. They gave me some place to put feelings that felt too heavy to carry internally. And in a lot of ways, these journals helped shape the person I became. But just because something once served a purpose doesn't mean that it needs to stay with you forever. And these journals were no longer helping me process my life. They were keeping parts of me emotionally frozen in places that I had already outgrown. And I didn't need to keep carrying proof of every painful moment in order for those experiences to have mattered. So eventually I made peace with letting them go. The difficult part was that my journals weren't neatly divided into happy memories and painful processing. Everything was mixed together. One page would be a funny story or a beautiful memory, and the next 3 pages I'm spiraling over something painful or overwhelming. So pretty quickly I realized that this wasn't going to be as simple as just throwing a box into the recycling bin. If I wanted to do this thoroughly and thoughtfully, I was going to have to go through every journal, every entry, every page. And I knew it was going to hurt. But I also kind of knew that there wasn't really a shortcut around it. As they say, the only way out was through. So that's what I did. I sat down and reread every single entry in every single journal. If there was a memory or reflection or moment that felt meaningful to me, I tore the page out and put it in my keep pile. Everything else went into the discard pile. And page by page, I started realizing how much of what I've been carrying around for years I didn't actually want or need anymore. And now for the cathartic part. There are honestly a lot of ways you could destroy journals. You could throw them into recycling, but that wasn't going to work for me because I didn't like the idea of just tossing deeply personal things into the recycling bin and having potentially even a stranger finding my deepest thoughts. You could burn them, and I know that burning journals is kind of a symbolic release ritual for a lot of people, but realistically, that sounded too complicated and stressful to me. So I decided to shred them. From my perspective, shredding them wasn't passive. It was actively participating in letting them go. I watched every page be shredded into tiny, tiny pieces, page by page, entry by entry. I fed these memories into the shredder myself, and I felt incredibly empowered as I did it. The physical destruction of every painful page, every painful memory, it was so cathartic. And again, it's not because those experiences didn't matter. And it's not because I disliked past versions of myself, but because for the first time, it felt like I was consciously deciding that I didn't need to keep carrying all of it with me anymore. Something I realized during this whole process is that I actually do enjoy journaling. But interestingly enough, the journals I loved rereading the most were not emotional rant journals. They were the simple everyday memory journals. There was a period, maybe about 5 years ago, where I journaled almost every day. But instead of emotionally unloading onto the page, I mostly just documented normal life. Things I ate, things I did, random conversations, small observations, work stories. Pretty boring stuff, honestly. But those were the entries I loved revisiting. Those journals just felt so light and warm, and they made me smile instead of having me emotionally spiral. At the same time, though, I also realized I did need those negative rant entries when I wrote them. I remember the emotional states I was in at the time. I remember why I needed to write down those things. And sometimes I generally had nowhere else for these emotions to go. So journaling helped me process them instead of trapping everything internally. So this process wasn't really about deciding that negative journaling is bad. It was more that I realized I don't necessarily want to archive every single emotional spiral for decades and continuously revisit it later. And because of that, I came up with a new system for myself. The journals I keep long-term are going to be for memory keeping. Daily life, happy things, meaningful things, little moments I actually want to revisit years from now. But anything that is purely emotional processing, anger, spiraling thoughts, frustration, pages full of swear words because I can't articulate what I'm feeling, that goes into a tiny scrap journal I carry with me. It's literally just a few stapled pages with terrible handwriting. And once it's full, I throw it away. Or shred it. That's it. Because by then, it's already served its purpose. So, these are the pages that survived. The memories I actually want to carry forward. And my plan is to eventually bind them together into a journal of their own. A journal I'll actually look forward to rereading someday. I like that idea so much more than carrying around boxes and boxes full of emotional pain just because I felt guilty letting it go. It's been about 6 months since I started this process, and so far I genuinely don't regret it. If anything, I feel lighter. And not because I erased my past, but because I stopped treating every painful thought I've ever had as something that deserved permanent storage in my physical space. And I think that's probably the biggest thing I'm taking away from all of this. Not everything we process needs to become a part of our permanent identity. Sometimes things are meant to just help us survive the moment and then be released. So now I'm curious about you. Do you keep all your old journals and diaries? How often do you reread them, if at all? Would you ever consider getting rid of them? Or are you someone who could never part with them no matter what? Let me know in the comments. And until next time, bye.